Those big, bold plans are wonderful, and the world needs you. But my advice is to leave some room for those plans to change. Resist the idea that anything you've done here at Stanford has already locked you into one path. Be excited about the fact that you will encounter possibilities you haven't even imagined. I've been thinking a lot lately about transitions. The spiritual leader Ram Dass had a wonderful teaching about two waves traveling through the ocean, one big and one small. And as the waves get closer to the land, the big wave sees what's about to happen. They see all the waves ahead of them are just crashing onto the shore. And devastated, the big wave says to the small wave, he warns them, the end is near. And the small wave just smiles and says, don't worry, we'll be fine. You don't understand, the big wave insists, we're done for. And the smaller wave is just totally calm and says, no, we're not. And I can explain why in just 6 words. You're not a wave, you're water. I love that story. It captures what it's like to experience an enormous transition without losing the core of who you are. I turned 60 this year, and you don't get to be my age without navigating all kinds of transitions. Some you embraced, and some you never expected. Some you hoped for, and some you fought as hard as you could. For me, those included starting my career at Microsoft, losing one of my very best friends to cancer, falling in love, having children, starting my work on behalf of women and girls, and ending a marriage and partnership of almost 30 years, and very recently, making a major career shift. In each case, there was a moment that I felt like that big wave, terrified that life as I knew it was about to be over. But I always made it to the next day, and so will you. And I've learned that the next day is when the real work begins. Because what we do the next day is what makes us who we are. So in addition to honoring all of your accomplishments today, I also want to offer you something to think about when you wake up tomorrow. I've learned from my own experience with transitions. The first piece of advice is to enter these moments with radical open-heartedness. Most of the time, we walk around through life in the thicket of our everyday routine. But during a transition, we step out of our familiar surroundings into a big, wide open space where everything is new. And there are 2 ways to encounter these spaces. You can keep your head down and focus on finding the shortest distance possible from one familiar thing to the next. Or you can find the courage to linger in that liminal space and see what it has to tell you. That, to me, is practicing open-heartedness. I have to admit, as a young person, I managed transitions in the first way. I had a list of goals I wanted to accomplish, and as soon as I checked one off the list, I raced across the clearing to the next one. Because frankly, it was a lot less scary that way. But as I've gotten older, I've learned the value of embracing uncertainty. I'll give you one example of what this has looked like in my life. When I entered philanthropy more than 25 years ago, it was completely unfamiliar terrain. I didn't have any experience in global health or development yet. So I had a lot to learn, and I knew I'd need to pay attention. Now, initially, we thought the foundation's work was going to focus on vaccine access. But when I started traveling around the world to see the work in action, the women I met kept changing the subject. They'd say, "What about the shots I used to get?" they'd ask me. And they were talking about contraceptives. So I stopped and I listened to what they had to say. And soon I was talking about contraceptives on almost all my trips and continuing those conversations back home with my team. And those conversations led to others. I learned how much society benefits when women are able to make their own decisions, control their own resources, and direct their own futures. And I began to focus my efforts there instead. I think back now to those early trips with such gratitude because the women I met took me in a new direction, and they led me to my life's work. Now, you are Stanford students, so I imagine most of you are graduating today with big plans for yourselves. Higher degrees to earn, causes to advance, companies to start, industries to disrupt. Those big, bold plans are wonderful, and the world needs you. But my advice is to leave some room for those plans to change. Resist the idea that anything you've done here at Stanford has already locked you into one path or any one kind of career. Be excited about the fact that you will encounter possibilities you haven't even imagined. And be willing to let what you learn shift your thinking about what you're here on this earth to do. Remember that once the wave learns to call itself by a different name, once it realizes it's not just a wave, but it is water, it becomes free to take on new forms. And the same is true for you. That brings me to my second piece of advice, and it's quite short. Find your small wave. In the story about the waves, the smaller wave is the hero because it helps the big wave see things another way. In fact, the small wave isn't small at all. It has the perspective on the big wave that the big wave doesn't have on itself. Graduates, no matter who you are or where you are in life, a small wave is an incredibly valuable thing to have. Different people will play that role for you at different times in life. In the early days of my career, that person was a colleague named Charlotte. From the moment I got to Microsoft, I absolutely loved the work we were doing. But as time went on, I realized I didn't love the culture. It was brash and aggressive, and that wasn't me. I was the only woman in my hiring class of MBAs, and I felt a lot of pressure to emulate the men around me. Eventually, I reached a point when I thought maybe I would leave the company. And like the big wave, I thought things were coming to an end for me. But Charlotte helped me see things differently. She was a little older and had a little bit more experience, and she'd already figured out how to navigate the culture there without losing her own identity. Having Charlotte in my life made it possible for me to imagine a future at Microsoft also. So graduates, I promise you that here in this stadium today, there is someone who is going to play that small wave role for you. Someone who can help you imagine yourself as the person you want to become. And just as important, there is someone here who needs you to serve that role for them in return. And when you wake up tomorrow, no longer the person you are today, and not yet the person you will become next, I hope you will draw courage and confidence knowing that you graduates are water, the force that shapes the shore. What a powerful force you are. Thank you.